Hi everyone, David and Gino here, taking a look at race 9 on Saturday at Saratoga. It is the Grade 2 Troy, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf course. And of course, this one redrawn from last week's Saturday card when they had to cancel a couple of the turf stakes, just postpone them until this Saturday. Hopefully the weather forecast turns a little bit and gets a little sunnier because looking like we could have rain again, especially the Friday leading into this Saturday card. So hopefully we're able to get these turf races in, but you might want to handicap for some wetter conditions as far as the turf condition goes on Saturday. And we'll see how that affects the likely favorite in this race, the number 4 Cogburn. As we throw up the field for this race, I installed him as the 1-2 morning line favorite. And I think he deserves every bit of that if he's going to repeat the last race that he ran in the Grade 1 Jaipur, when he ran 5.5 furlongs in sub 1 minute, 59-4. Gino, I don't think he's going to run that fast on Saturday with the likely conditions, but if he repeats that effort, he's going to be awfully tough to beat.
Yeah, feeling of deja vu here, David. I feel like we did this about a week ago where we talked about almost this entire field. Just one different runner, I believe, where Step Forward will now be in instead of Mischief Magic, who was in the field last time out. So similar runners in here, just some different post positions, but everybody is going to have to be on their A game to beat a horse like Cogburn. Maybe with different turf conditions, we can have some sort of an equalizer, right? Because with a horse like him, you figure in ideal circumstances, he's able to throw up incredible races, but maybe in less than ideal circumstances, if it is a little wet, if the turf has a little give, maybe it can even things out and open the field up for some other possibilities in here.
Let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this Troy to get a sense of what kind of trip Cogburn might have coming to him. And I don't think the fact that Step Forward is coming into the race as opposed to last week where Mischief Magic was the other horse in here who was a deep closer, I don't think it changes the likely pace that much. Step Forward is a horse that has much more tactical speed than the runner who was in this race last week, but I don't think anybody is as fast as Cogburn on the front end. If they really want to use that horse's speed, Step Forward, I wouldn't put too much stock at his last running line because he had significant trouble at the start. But even when he gets sent to be forward, he's not running the kind of fractions or pace figures that Cogburn is able to produce. So I know these two are kind of shown alongside each other on the front end. I think if Irad really wants the lead on Cogburn, he's going to be able to get it.
Absolutely agree. And just from a class standpoint, too, if you're looking at Step Forward was a horse who was running okay in some graded stakes races up at Woodbine, but was defeated by Witty. So if you want to use Witty as kind of a measuring stick for this race as to where Step Forward was, to me, he does just sort of look like a big long shot in here.
Well, let's start by taking a look at Witty, who you just mentioned. He is the number 1 in this race, and he's a horse who has been really solid in these turf sprints over the past couple of seasons. He's almost always in the exacta running in these kinds of races. This is going to be a step up in class for him from the Highlander last time, where the horse that actually won that race, Phila di Ariana, I think was behind Cogburn and really a non-factor in the Jaipur. So the form lines there suggest that maybe Witty a cut below the likely favorite in this race, but if any pace does develop, the one thing you know about this horse is he's going to be firing in the stretch.
Yeah, you know what you're going to get from him. He's a half bro to Caravel, grade 2 place, multiple stakes winner. So he does have some ability, but in a race like this where it doesn't look like there's that much speed, maybe 2 or 3 pace horses, and we don't even know if they'll be battling out on the front end. And Witty is a deeper closer and he draws the rail. I just feel like there could be a lot of work for him to do in here and not necessarily get the kind of race shape he needs. So would be more of an underneath horse for me that I could see late on the scene.
The number 2 Outlaw Kid has run some nice speed figures at different points in the past. He's actually done some of his best running on the Naira circuit when he's run here. And that was the case last time when he got back to Aqueduct, upset a optional claiming race, beating Big Invasion, who will face off against once again in this race. I thought that Outlaw Kid got a very good trip and pace setup that day because it sort of was falling apart at the end after a horse set some pretty quick fractions on the front end that day. He's just going to have to run a little better than his recent efforts if he's going to be a factor at this level.
Yeah, he's a horse that I could see as a price horse. So if you're looking to spice things up, maybe you're going to play Cogburn on top of horses underneath, or you're throwing in a couple other horses along with Cogburn in some of your multi-exotics. What I like about Outlaw Kid is we saw that last year. He has a pretty high ceiling. He threw up a 100 buyer speed figure when winning a race going 6 furlongs on the turf. So we know he's capable of high speed figures and really big efforts. And I think that if he's able to improve just slightly off of that last effort in the third start of the form cycle here. He could take one more step forward and be in the mix where he's very competitive with the rest of this group. Maybe not Cogburn, but I could see him being very competitive and being a horse that runs third or fourth in the bottom of your exotics. So I'll give him a little bit of a shot as a price horse underneath.
Now, Gino, I'm going to make a little bit of a pitch for the number 3 Step Forward, who I know you were a little dismissive of when we talked about the pace projector. But this horse, well, I don't necessarily love his efforts coming into the last race. I do want to appreciate how well he ran in that most recent start at Saratoga. It's actually a trip that I did on my Horses to Watch show on the DRF YouTube channel, because this horse had some significant trouble at the start, got steadied back. Jose Ortiz just basically had to pull back on the reins, and this horse lost a good 6-7 lengths of position. Was way back out the back door early. And I know he started out in last and finished in last, but he was really firing a big shot through the stretch. It might have actually passed some horses at the wire, if not for kind of running into the backs of horses' heels at the end of that race and having to be geared down a little bit in those final few strides. And when you look at some of the fractions the horse was running coming home in that race, I think he ran his final quarter in just over 22 seconds. He threw in a few 21 and change quarters trying to catch up to the field. This horse did some real running in that last race. I think you can make the argument that he actually might have run the best race of anybody in that July 28th affair. Now, he probably has to do even better than that, even if he had won that race, to beat a horse like Cogburn, but he's going to be a really big price in here. I don't want to knock him too much as a horse that could get a piece of this at a price.
And on the bottom of exotics, what was so impressive to me, David, was that he just hadn't done anything close to that before in his career. His wins and his best races had come when he was on the lead or very close to it. We'd never seen him pass horses like that, make up that kind of ground. He had every right to just pack it in early. And that's what happens a lot of the times, right? When a speed horse gets that kind of a trip where they're just away slowly, very rarely do they even run at all. They just pack it in and they just sort of use it like a workout. And you'll see them kind of wheel back quickly in a few weeks a lot of the time and then want to show their speed. So I agree with you in that if you're looking for some of those bottom of exotic horses, I have no problem with him. And what's nice about him, as I'll point out with just Dancing Buck, if you're looking for some prices in here, maybe it is some of these horses who you just think can sit close and who can work out their own trips, and they will get a jump on some of the other deeper closers who just might not get the pace shape they need in here.
The number 4 is Cogburn, who is going to be the prohibitive favorite in this race. And it's kind of interesting to look back at the Troy last year when he was in a very different position. He was the horse that was sort of spoiling the party, Caravel, the big favorite that day. And there was soft turf conditions. They got sort of a wacky result, and the wacky result was Cogburn winning. In retrospect, though, maybe Cogburn was the best horse all along, because he's reeled off quite the series of performances, including this last race that we'll take a look at here, the Grade 1 Jaipur, where he earned that towering 111 Beyer. And the most interesting thing about this horse so far in 2024 is that he's really transformed his running style. He was a closing sprinter last year. That's how he achieved his victory in the Troy, rallying from off the pace. But this year, he's had gate speed. He gets to the front and then closes off his own fractions to open up at the end. That's a really that's a tough horse to beat, that he's able to use that running style to finish the way he does after being forwardly placed.
Yeah, the turf sprint effort where he's right on top, but then he's just fine sitting off of horses. And then last time out, they didn't even want to get cute at all. He just flies early and flies throughout. And when you're just trying to poke holes in favorites, because that's our job as gamblers, right? We got to try to find reasons why horses like this won't win. He's just so difficult when he's in a race like this and he's matched up with a field like this, because he's probably the fastest on paper, but he can sit off if he has to, if they want to get a little aggressive with one of the horses from the inside. He's run well at Saratoga. The race that he just won, the Jaipur, he's already beat 3 next out winners, 3 next out stakes winners, 2 of them graded stakes winners. So the caliber of the horses he's beating have been very good, and they're coming back live. He's just really tough to knock at this point in his career too. He's only making his 3rd start of the year. I don't know how much faster he can run based on speed figures, but based on the form cycle, there's actually upside in him making his 3rd start of the year. He's just really scary from a gambling perspective if you're trying to beat him. And I couldn't do it in this spot, but you were a little braver than me this time around.
Well, we'll get to a horse that I think might be dangerous, but I agree. Cogburn is pretty tough to knock in this Troy. The number 5 is Thin White Duke, and maybe a horse who could be helped a little by some given the ground because he's outrun his odds a few times in the past when there's a little cut in the turf course. That was the case in the Troy last year, which was many more starts back at his past performances than for Cogburn because Thin White Duke just participates in a lot of races, and that's been the case so far this year. But he's the kind of horse that seems to thrive on the action. He's already making the 5th start of his season after just launching his 2024 campaign back in early May. And he did finish a good 3rd in the Troy last year, closing behind Cogburn before ultimately getting that stakes victory over the Saratoga turf course in the Harvey Pack. I don't think he's necessarily a win candidate, but I won't be surprised when he gets a piece of this.
Yeah, he was 3rd in this race in both of the last 2 years, but he's 0 for his last 7. And you can find a few excuses for some of his trips because you'll find some for most horses on long turf races or, in a turf sprint like this. But he's actually coming out of races where I didn't think I could upgrade him all that much to compete with a group like this. I could see him late on the scene, but he really is going to have to run one of the better races of his career, I think, to be in the top, in the exacta here.
The number 6 is Big Invasion. He is a horse who ended his 2023 campaign on a high note when he was a very close second behind No Balls in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint at a bit of a price that day. So far, his 5-year-old campaign has been a little bit disappointing. He hasn't yet won a race. Just seems like maybe he's lost a step at this age. He was really not a factor in the Turf Sprint. Did have some trouble in the stretch of the Jaipur. He was a little keen in the early stages of that race, but still, even without that trouble, it's not like he was ever going to be a serious factor at the end. And last time out, he got nailed on the wire by Outlaw Kid. And I can make the argument that he ran slightly better than that foe because he made the first move into a pace that was kind of coming apart at the end. But I still just get the sense that maybe this isn't the same Big Invasion that we've seen in prior seasons.
Yeah, I agree. He's run well at Saratoga. He moved into that fast pace last time out. I just still thought that was probably a race that on his best day, he would have won, that he probably would have gotten the job done there. So I'm looking at him, and you'll get rewarded on price for him. I just like a couple others more in here, and I'm a little concerned with his race shape. I'm not sure if it's going to fall apart where that will probably suit him best. He was your Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint runner-up, but he just hasn't gotten back to anything like that big effort or like some of his bigger efforts at the end of last year.
The 7 is Dancing Buck. He's one of those that was also ran behind Cogburn in the Jaipur last time out and just sort of got outrun through the early stages of that race, couldn't really keep up with the pace and stayed on decently for 6th. I like that he didn't just fall apart after getting outrun to the lead in that spot because he is a horse who does his best work when he is forwardly placed in his races. On the flip side of that, I thought he had all the best of it too back in the elusive quality. When he got to the front end, his main pace rival didn't break that day, so he was able to enjoy a favorable pace scenario. So I think Dancing Buck's true talents lie somewhere between those two results, but he's another one that I won't be surprised when he hangs on for a piece again.
Yeah, I'm just confident that they're going to try to get him much more forwardly placed because of the trouble they had last time when he was drawn down to the inside. He had a good start. They had to make a split-second decision. Do we want to get really aggressive and try to push through, or maybe we try to back off a little bit? He wasn't quite as fast as some of the others to the outside. He backed off a little bit. He ended up getting shuffled back pretty badly, and he just didn't really have much of a chance with that effort. I do agree with you that I think a lot of his best efforts come pretty ideal circumstances when he's facing fields that don't have all that much speed. I think in this race, he actually is only facing maybe 2 other speedy rivals in here. So while I don't think he can beat Cogburn, I do think he can run pretty well in here if he's able to sit just to the outside of Cogburn or just within that, couple lengths of the lead, because I don't think there are going to be that many horses forwardly placed in here. I think he can outrun his odds, and he would be a horse that I would use in the exotics underneath Cogburn at a bit of a price.
The number 8 is XY Speed, and he's got some class questions to answer coming in this race, but you really can't knock his current form. He is in the best form of his career right now as an 8-year-old. We'll take a look at his most recent start in a handicap at Gulfstream Park, where he beat a solid field, but did so showing much more early initiative than he had in some of his prior races down south, stalking the pace before just pulling away from this field at the end. He's earned a series of buyer speed figures that put him in the mix with some of the favorites in here, not necessarily Cogburn, but the others that will be chasing him. The big question for XY speed, I think now is twofold. When this race was drawn last week, it was class. Can he step up against these kinds of horses? And now it is, can he run the same kind of race over a turf course with some give to it? Whereas at Gulfstream, you really hear your feet rattle on those firm courses down there. And I think it's going to be a very different kind of going on Saturday at Saratoga.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it too. Sometimes with horses like this, that extra half a furlong could also be key. He might be a real 5 furlong type horse, a 5 furlong on the firm down at Gulfstream type horse, going 5.5 on a turf course that might be wet and playing a little differently at Saratoga. Those are way different circumstances. So for me, I respect his ability quite a bit. And if this were home court for him, going 5 at Gulfstream, then I would maybe give him a little bit of a look to, use that home court advantage, and maybe he could jump up and sort of outrun what his overall talent was. This is going to be a tough ask for him facing Cogburn on a wet turf course at Saratoga going 5.5. So he'll definitely have to earn it in here.
Speaking of horses that are in great form right now, that is certainly the case for the number 9, Grooms All Business. We'll take a look at his most recent start in the Get Serious Stakes at Monmouth Park. Now, he got a great trip this day, but really fires once he sees some daylight at the top of the stretch to run down Super Quest, who came right back to win that high-level optional claimant that we were talking about with regard to the Mark Casse horse. Step forward a little bit earlier in this preview. So Grooms All Business, he's already 2 for 2 this season. I would argue that his performance off the layoff 2-back in the turf sprint on Preakness weekend was even more impressive because, number one, he handled soft going that day, so we know that given the course is not going to bother him, and he had to alter course in the stretch that day. It looked like Witty had made the winning move, and Grooms All Business kind of had to pause behind that horse's move, alter outside of him, and still ran that horse down. He's just razor sharp right now, going out for a bar, and Jorge Duarte, who has gotten off to a very strong start so far in 2024, and nobody's riding better than Dylan Davis at the Saratoga meet.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to take a shot against Cogburn, like, this is the logical horse, I think, that can actually win the race, get the trip if Cogburn were to get softened up a little bit. And perhaps this horse is a little better than we think because he's maybe been facing a cut below what this group is, the top tier of turf sprinters. But if you look at his last 5 races, he's won 4 of them. They're all turf sprints. The only time he lost was when he was actually trapped behind horses on August the 13th, and he had a legitimate excuse that day. Otherwise, he's 5 for his last 5 in turf sprints. It seems like he's continuing to improve. His speed figures, he's not that far below, hitting the triple-digit buyers and like being a legitimate buyer speed figure horse too. So yeah, I think he's a very fair, a very honest horse. And if Cogburn does show up without his A game, this horse looks as good as any in winning this spot.
I think we can quickly cycle through the last couple of runners entered for turf in here based on our conversation last week. I know neither one of us has much interest in these two. The number 10, Sosua Summer, going to be a big price in here. He tried to contest the pace with Cogburn last time in the Jaipur, was no match for that foe. I'm not sure what's supposed to be different this time.
We can play the say one nice thing game with both of them. So with Sosua Summer, this is a horse for course who's run really well at Saratoga. So if you want to upgrade him a little bit on the bottom of some of your exotics, you can say that. And then if we were going to move to the outside, David, with Mischievous Angel, if you wanted to toss the race going long and then just isolate the sprints, the form would make sense there. But even in doing that, this is a horse who would need to step way, way up and run a much faster race than anything he's run so far. So I can give you some positives about both of them, but I just don't think it's positive enough to make a dent in this race.
Yeah, we agree on that. Both horses would need significant boosts on their current form. Well, let's throw up our picks for this Grade 2 Troy. And Gino, you have Cogburn on top once again, as you did last week. He is just way the horse to beat. No dispute for me. If he runs his race, he's just going to beat this field.
Yeah, I didn't really change a whole lot in this race because I didn't think the complexion of the race was going to change all that much with just one new horse in here. The horses who I think could maybe outrun their odds a little bit. Dancing Buck, he can be forwardly placed. Mentioned the 2, Outlaw Kid down on the inside, who has a nice ceiling. Can he take one more step forward? And if you are legitimately trying to beat Cogburn in here, I think it's with the horse that you have picked on top now with Grooms All Business. And just seeing the fact that he ran that well over the soft turf course gives me some real hope if this is a horse you want to throw into any multis or if you want to play to win.
Yeah, I'm not against Cogburn by any means, but I just think the likely weather forecast for Saturday, if they get this race in on the turf, it's going to create a course that's very different than the one that Cogburn ran over in the Jaipur. And while he has handled soft courses in the past, if he runs the kind of race he did in the Troy last year as opposed to the Jaipur last time, I don't know if he deserves to be 1-2 against this field. And maybe he just is on a different level now during his 5-year-old campaign. But I think at the price he's going to be, there are enough reasons with the uncertainty of the weathers and the turf condition to take a small shot against him with the number 9 Grooms All Business for the reasons that you mentioned. He's a horse who's in great form right now. We know he can handle some given the ground. And I just think the connections are too dangerous to pass up at what is likely going to be a much higher price than the favorite in this race. I've also got the number 3 in there, Step Forward, who I mentioned earlier, but for me, he's more of an underneath type. So the number 9, Grooms All Business on top for me. The number 4, Cogburn for Gino in the Grade 2 Troy on Saturday at Saratoga. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.